evening. I want to welcome each and every one of you that is here for the live presentation at the Midpoint Library, as well as the 12 other participants who are watching it from afar as we experiment with our webinar software. Welcome to everyone. Tonight we're going to talk about ethnicity estimates. I think you've probably heard that they aren't always reliable. We're going to talk about the science that goes behind them and what you can count on and what you might need to take with a grain of salt. So the first question that all of us encounter is, I've had my DNA tested at all three companies. Why do I have different results? Well, here's an example of my DNA and the differences in the results from three different companies. If you notice at the continental level, all three companies, 23andMe, Ancestry.com, and FTDNA, say that I have a European ethnicity ranging from a low of 98% and a high of 99.7%. All of the companies are good at identifying continental results. It's when we get to the sub-regional categories that we begin to see some discrepancies. If you look at my 23andMe results, they predict that I have 65% British and Irish ancestry. At Ancestry.com, they split that into 32% Irish, 23% British. But where did this large Scandinavian population come from that was not reflected at 23andMe? And finally, when you look at the FTDNA results, you can see that they use the terminology British Isles at 58% with 19% Scandinavian. Why these discrepancies? It's some of these questions that we hope to answer tonight.
So in the science of genetic genealogy, ethnicity estimates are the least reliable aspect of the science, and yet that's how they market all these tests. Ancestry is trying to get everybody to find out whether they have to give up their lederhosen for a kilt, right? Okay, so we know that it's the least reliable science. I get equally mad, though, when somebody says there is no science, because that is absolutely not true. There is science. It's just that each company uses a different reference population to come up with their estimates. So the key word is estimates. Every one of them is claiming that it's an estimate. All three companies can reliably estimate your ethnicity at the continental level. They can tell you if most of your ancestry is European, Asian, African, or if you're a mixture. The results get more inconsistent at the sub-regional level. So why is that? What are the factors in their inconsistencies? Well, as I mentioned before, each company uses different reference samples, and we're going to see that specifically in a few minutes. And it's made up of their own proprietary data and publicly available data. Proprietary data often includes self-reported information from customers who report that all of their grandparents are from the same country. Self-reported results are extensively analyzed. So if you say, I know I'm from Germany, I know all four of my grandparents came from Germany, you know, all my great-grandparents came from Germany, and I'm sure of that, well, they're still going to test that result before they throw it in the sample. And they will throw out any outliers which differ significantly from others that are in the population. So as I said, when I started to do this talk, I started calling around to the companies because I knew FTDNA had made some major changes. In fact, when I gave this talk the last time, they had 22 populations. They now have 24. Rebecca and I were talking before this. One of the populations we know they've added is now, if you have Jewish heritage, they can actually divide it into, you aren't going to believe this, Sephardic as well as Ashkenazi Jew. And I have a cousin, I just got her results recently. We knew that she was Italian on her father's side of the family. Well, of course, she was disappointed because what they do but say like Southeast Europe, and I had to explain, yes, that's Italy. We'll get into that a little bit too. But surprisingly, it said that she was 10% Sephardic Jewish. Now, all of these companies will explain the history of the groups and in a story form as well as the science behind it. But that's an interesting group because they were mainly on the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal. And several hundred years ago, it was like convert or leave. And so I guess hers converted, became Italian, who knows, because we're talking probably at least 500 years ago. I was really surprised because I noticed on my slide from the last time I did this that I had an asterisk there that said, Ancestry.com is currently beta testing a revised ethnicity program that will triple the number of reference samples. Well, I hadn't seen any announcement like that, so I called them up. I'm going to share with you what I found out. They haven't tripled it yet. It's not that there are 9,000 people in their reference population, but they have increased it from 3,000 to 3,967. And they're not distributed evenly. You'll see that too. Before, I could confidently say that 800 members of their group came from the Human Genome Project. 1,800 of them were based on customer self-reports, and 1,500 of them, when they decided to go into the Ancestry business, they bought the Sorensen Genomics company and used 1,500 of their sets of results to sort of build up their database initially. They could not tell me how it's broken down now.
Was that a Scandinavian company?
Ancestry?
No, Sorensen.
I don't know. Yeah, I wish I did, but I don't, unfortunately. So how are populations defined? Each company defines populations according to their own definition. For instance, if you are Greek, 23andMe will categorize you as Balkan. Ancestry.com would categorize the same set of results as Italy/Greece. So you have to be aware of what ethnic populations each company has. And lucky for you, since we're recording this, if all goes well, you'll be able to refer back to these slides and not have to hunt around for them. So we're first going to talk about Ancestry DNA because I know from previous talks that most of us have used Ancestry DNA, at least for one of our tests. So when I talked to the representative from Ancestry DNA, they said to me, these are the steps you must go through to find out how many people are in each reference population. And they're always changing. So they said, step one, on your DNA results, if you've used Ancestry, you're all familiar with a chart that looks like this, that breaks down your ethnicity estimate from thousands of years ago. So the first thing is to click on the box that looks like that. Step two, underneath that, you choose one of the populations you have. I picked two out for this talk. Ancestry has traditionally been a little bit high on the Scandinavian end. They think that I'm 34% Scandinavian. And you can see that they have a range of 12 to 54% they think would be right for me. And they also have a map with what they consider to be that Scandinavian region. And then you have to click on See Details. When you do that, and by the way, I did throw the German one in because so many of us have some German background here in Cincinnati. That is classified as Europe West. And they only gave me credit for 5% Europe West. Yet I know my great-grandfather, for instance, came from Germany. I was 10 years old when he died. I have several more recent German ancestors, but if you look back over time, it probably is a smaller amount than you might think. So, step three, click on See Details. This one is the one for Europe West. If you notice, it says region history. If you click on that, that's a whole story of migration patterns and how the people that ended up in this area, where they may have come from, where they ended up in the end. Great graphics and stories there. But for our purposes, we want to look at genetic diversity. So you click on that. Now, this is where you can find out how many people they have in the reference population. They have 416 people that they have in their reference population. If you're not familiar with that term, that means they're comparing your DNA to this group of 416 people to see how closely you match up with them. All of the companies have trouble with German, and that's because German and French are so intermingled they can't separate them. In fact, if you get 23andMe results, it says German, French. So look at this other problem that we have with German ancestry. If we look here, 52% of the people that are in this group that they have determined have German ancestry also have DNA from Great Britain. They have 46%, almost half the group has DNA from Scandinavia. And you can keep on going down and seeing that it gets to be less and less and less. But German DNA over history is quite mixed. And you can see that from the slides that they put up here if you look at genetic diversity. Let me contrast this one. Native Americans. You see the difference there? They've only got 131 people in their reference population, but look how similar their DNA is. So they can pretty accurately predict that. The problem is, we've talked about this before, with autosomal DNA, you can only, we're going to talk about it a little bit more in this talk too, but you can only reliably count on getting autosomal DNA from your previous ancestors for about 5 generations. And I'll show you a chart that shows you how it keeps falling off. So that's an easy one for them to diagnose because the populations aren't very diverse. All right, so I went through, I said to them, well, I had a nice table before that gave me the numbers in every one of their populations and what they were. Can I do that? Yes, you can. Click on all 26 reference populations and write down the number. Well, I'm a glutton for punishment, so I did that. Because one of the things that's interesting to me is sometimes how small these reference populations are. These reference populations are focused on Africa, and the number tested ranges from 115 down to just 16 people for a total of 480. If we look at Europe, you can see, and I will tell you, one of the big changes I'm going to show you on a slide, one of the big changes is what they've done with the Europe West population. They added way more people to their reference population there. But some of them, like Finland and Northwest Russia, by comparison, are still relatively small. But 2,267 people in their reference populations are European. So if you're of European descent, and that's where their market is, you're going to have a better chance of having a match than if you're from some other places. Asia, they have only 26 people in Asia Central. And if you want to know what that is, back there where it says the genetic diversity, you can click on that and it will define every one of the populations, what they mean by that. Most of the ones they use were from what they consider to be East Asia, some from South Asia, for a total of 832. The Middle East has a relatively small population of 153, with 58 being from the Caucasus region. Again, there's that Native American population. They have 131, and they have some Pacific Islanders in their database, but if you notice again, those are small numbers, 28 and 18 for a total of 46. So they have increased their database, and they're going to keep on doing it. And I know what FTDNA reran everybody. I don't know if at some point Ancestry is going to say, well, we've got enough of a difference that we'll rerun everybody. I just don't know what they're going to do. So this was my old table that I had in the previous PowerPoint. I went through and I put boxes around the ones where they've really focused their increased populations. You can see it did add up to 3,000, but one of the main ones they've added is Europe West, like I said. I think it went from 166 to 400 and something, if we look back. So that's where they're focusing their reference populations at this time. Now, C.C. Moore made a point of this when we were in the class this summer. She said, again, this is the Italy-Greece problem. If you look at Ancestry DNA, they say if you come up with Italy, Greece, it comes up also found in France, Switzerland, Portugal, Spain, Serbia, Hungary, Bulgaria, Austria, Croatia, and Bosnia, Romania, Turkey, Slovenia, Algeria, Tunisia, Montenegro, Albania, Macedonia, and Kosovo. So if you have grandparents you know came, for instance, Turkey or Spain, and that they went back several generations, if you do your test through Ancestry, it's going to come up Italy, Greece. On the bottom one, I have the comparison with 23andMe. Again, if you look, Greece is considered to be Balkan, and that's how they would report it out. So you have to be aware of some of these things too, you know, depending on which testing company you choose to use. So on to 23andMe. I know this slide isn't super easy to read, but it will be on your laptop. These are the 31 reference populations that they have. This happens to be my results. So you can see what percentage I am, and for the most part, you know, I'm not very, very diverse. Broadly, Northwestern European, again, they use the term French and German. They gave me 11.5. British and Irish, 65%. And 23andMe is pretty well, I think you'd probably agree with me, Susan, they're considered to have the best ethnicity results, you know. So then you think, wait a minute, how can that be? Well, when I really got into my genealogy going back, you know, we've talked about endogamous populations before. I have a big colonial American population in my DNA. And they all lived in New Jersey, all within a few miles of each other, all married each other. And so that DNA sort of makes it look like I have more British and Irish than, in fact, I would think that I have based on my current research. But that's probably pretty accurate, to tell you the truth. Once again, if you go to this page, and you don't have to worry about what it is because it's right on the slide, this is an example of how they define their population. So if you're a European, they will tell you exactly what they consider that to be, what companies are included. If you're East Asian and Native American, same thing. You can see what their reference population is. It's larger than the one that Ancestry has at this point, but they're working to catch up. Now, this is one of the great features that 23andMe added. They put a slider on there because, you know, people get upset with their results and they don't think they're accurate and they want to argue about them. And if you read Judy Russell, you know, they'd say they're not much better than a parlor game anyhow. But one of the tools that 23andMe has that is a big improvement is they've got a slider here. So you can take your results and keep moving the slider. Like right now it's set on 50% speculative. That's their level of confidence that what they're telling you is right. So let me show you how different that can be. Okay, this is for me, 23andMe. They have all the populations over there. They're nice and beautifully color-coded. they are 50% sure of what they're telling me there. Let me show you what happens as I move the confidence slider over. If I look at conservative, now this is, oh yeah, we're sure. We're pretty sure of this one. Look how sure they are. Now, if the companies are saying that, that's why I don't want anybody to go away here thinking there is no value to these ethnicity estimates. I think there's huge value, and it's getting better and better all the time. In the next presentation, I hope to show you something that Ancestry has added that I think is going to really be a game changer. So I made a chart here comparing in 23andMe. These are my results, speculative versus conservative estimates. And if you can notice, both of them, again, were pretty good at the continental level, 99.7, 97.7. Speculative, 65% versus 10%. French and German, 11.5 versus not even listed. And then Ashkenazi Jew, 0.2% versus 0.1%. So the thing to remember is that the more specific you try to get, the more speculative the guess. So if you want greater specificity, the trade-off is going to be greater speculation. And this is why I always say, if you're German, you're going to be disappointed. How many of you have some German heritage? Okay, a lot of us, we're from Cincinnati, we do. But I want to show you another thing that they try to explain. Ancestry's composition recall is also impressive. What is recall? Well, they go through and calculate everything on every population by precision versus recall. Precision is using controls. When the system predicts a piece of DNA is from a population A, how often is it correct? So if their system thinks you're German, thinks you're Irish, thinks you're African American, thinks you're Native American, and you know you are, precision is how often it's going to predict that correctly. Recall of the pieces of DNA that were actually from a population, so let's say we know for sure these people were from Germany. We've got the documentation. We know they go back several generations. Well, recall is how often the system predict they were from population A. So we know they are, but did it predict they are? Watch what happens with German. It's pretty scary. Here's their table, okay? If I look at the first one, the sub-Saharan African population, their precision is 0.99, their recall is 0.98, which means we think you're sub-Saharan African, and by God, you are. Pretty darn good. Let's go down to French and German. Precision, 0.74, recall, 0.07. Okay, so therein lies the problem. It's just very, very difficult to tell. And they range all over the place. Oceanian, if you notice, it's got good precision as well as good recall. But other ones, Eastern European, if you know anything about the history of some of these communities, there was a lot of migration in and out and changing of borders too. And I've got something to show you at the end on that. So, this is C.C. Moore's quote. Over time and with experience, we have found the scope and depth of autosomal DNA matching to be more extensive than was once believed. As a result of these early descriptions of the limited utility of autosomal DNA, we still often encounter misconceptions about its potential. On the other hand, there have been some highly questionable claims about what autosomal DNA is and is capable of proving. As with any genealogical pursuit, we must be cautious not to jump to conclusions. There are some people in this country that are still going around preaching the gospel, as we know, don't we, Susan? If it's not Y DNA, forget it. Yeah. She made me aware. She went to a talk. It's in New Mexico, so I don't have to worry. I do not know the person. Right. Right. And it sort of made me angry because that isn't true. If any of you have seen the thing I put together on how I found my cousin using autosomal, yes, more and more, and with more and more people testing, there's a lot of things we can learn with autosomal DNA. But I think her advice is good. As with any genealogical pursuit, we must be cautious and not jump to conclusions. When I took the course from Cece, anybody that has probably recognizes this. She's certainly let us use this because it's sort of an interesting quirk in her own DNA. This is hers. And so the middle one, it's Cece on the left, her mother in the middle, her dad on the right. Well, what's really interesting, she has pointed out that Cece has 3% Middle Eastern and North African DNA, yet her father doesn't have any, and her mother only has 1%. So how's that work? You know, you can't, like, you get your DNA from mom and dad. How did the percentage increase? She also has 27% British Isles compared to her father's 10% and her mother's 0%. Again, how's that work? You know, so I guess my advice is take it with a grain of salt, but don't discount it. That's my message. Here's another table that I absolutely love. In 2013, someone tried to research how many generations you could go and reliably expect to inherit DNA from an ancestor. And if you can see, generations back, when we get to 5 or 6 generations, yeah, you're probably going to have some DNA, probably very, very small, but from a real live, honest-to-God ancestor. But look how quickly it falls off. You know, by the 8th generation, it's much, much smaller. The key says that the dark line is typical transmissions, the blue line is from the mother, the red line's from the father. But you can see it follows a pattern for all of them. And so as the generations back, that's why when people say to me, I know, and it's not just a myth, I know I have Native American in me and it doesn't show up. Well, it's probably because it was more than 5 generations.
I'm dealing in the 14th generation and I find it very interesting.
Yeah, but I mean, you can't count on it, is with autosomal. Here's another thing I really like that 23andMe does. This happens to be my grandson's DNA. And if you're lucky enough to have your parents tested, Rebecca, we were talking about this, oh, look what you can do. They'll give you a breakdown of what percentage came from your father and what percentage came from your mother. Now, it just so happens that my son-in-law is of Hungarian descent, which would be probably, what do they got that in this chart? Doesn't look like much at all. They've got that little orange sliver in East Asian and Native American. Again, I know that he's more than that, but I also know from him describing his family's history and his mother too, borders were constantly changing over there, you know, around Hungary or Romania, and we'll see that too. But you can see what DNA my grandson apparently inherited from mom and what from dad. I love this one because this is what my grandson inherited from me and my ex-husband, because they separated out my DNA, my ex's DNA, and what my grandson got from each of us. Now, if you notice, you see the little gray parts that don't have anything? What do you think that might be? I'm sorry? No. Believe it or not, it's the, well, you're on the right track though. It's the paternal grandparents. We're the maternal grandparents, and there you are, but all those other parts came from his paternal grandparents. Haven't got them tested. but look out. Okay, family tree DNA has made some major changes, especially to their my origins. That's how they report out ethnicity at family tree DNA. So you can see, in my case, say 96% European, 3% Central and South Asian, and now this is the new thing. Before it said European Jew, I believe. Now it says Sephardic Jew for me. And I looked, I'll show you in a minute, they just separated that out. They got a big enough reference population. I think they started doing that in April. So my results changed. These are all of their reference populations here. And like I said, you can see that they've now divided Jewish into Ashkenazi and Sephardic. So they've added a couple populations since the last time. They do have 24 clusters, and they've really done a lot with their stuff too, and they reran everything. So this is the kind of thing you can also get. I was curious about the Sephardic Jewish cluster. You can look, they explain what that is, and most of us don't know. So I think that's pretty cool. Or any one of the other reference populations. You can click on the little box with the plus sign, and up will come a description of that population and the information that they have that made them categorize things the way they did. This, as you can see, I was really surprised. It's like, how did this get by me? Well, I found this letter, and it says published April 7th, 2017. Our recent update of My Origins 2.0 has added to and refined our population clusters. So this is another thing that really upsets people. They don't understand, you know, I've got it framed. I'm this, this, and this, and then they go and rerun the stuff, and now I'm this, this, and this. How can that happen? Is this science for real? Well, it is, but you can see it's all based on their reference populations, and we want them to get stronger and stronger, because as they do, the results will become more and more reliable. So they now have 24 reference populations. Here's a list of them. And as I said, sometimes if you're like Greek or if you're Irish, or you really have to check and see what each company is going to call that. Look at this. FTDNA back in the day only had 17 people that they classified as German, and I don't even know how to say Gujarati. 17 people, that's all they had. 14 from Kuwait. Okay, so they were in need of an upgrade. They've done it. Yeah, okay. One of the other things that I really like about FTDNA is that they'll give you these ethnicity maps, and they're color-coded where they think your population came from. The darker the color, the more ethnicity they predict you have from these regions. And you can see in every one of these cases, it's darker in the middle and then expands out. And you can see some of my Scandinavian, I know darn well because I come from Northwest Germany. You know, one time part of Denmark was even part of Germany there. And so I'm sure there was a lot of migration back and forth there too. They also have this really neat feature. And like I said, these are new little features they've added. They will, I did not put the key on there, but you can see where maternal and paternal ancestors lived, and then where they ended up in the United States base, if you have a family tree in there, which I think is a pretty nice feature too. Known issues. At least when I wrote this talk about a year ago, these were the known issues. 23andMe's model had trouble differentiating between Southern Italian ancestry and Middle Eastern ancestry. And again, it's because there was, over the centuries, a lot of migration back and forth. Ancestry has trouble with Jewish ethnicity if there is no other evidence of validity, which means if I've identified myself as a Jew, oh yeah, that could be more evidence of its validity, but they've had some trouble with that a little bit. FTDNA is known for including North African, Middle Eastern predictions for a child, when neither parent has it. Think CC Moore. And none of the companies, unfortunately for us in this area, can differentiate between French and German. So it took me a long time to get this through my head. Each of us actually has two trees. We have a genealogical family tree, and that includes all of our ancestors, known and unknown. And we have a genetic family tree that only includes a subset of ancestors from whom we inherited DNA. So this is the problem again with getting 8, 9, 10 generations back. The DNA, if you have any DNA, and some people love to work with these little tiny small segments, but if you have it, it's going to be really small. And so I may know who my 8th great grandfather is and have it all documented, and I'm absolutely right. But I may not be able to say I have any of my 8th great grandfather's DNA. So here's a nice little chart, one of Blaine's charts. This is your genealogical family tree, starting with you in the middle and moving out. It's everybody. This is a genetic family tree, and it's meant to show that you're not going to inherit everything from everyone over time. When trying to understand ethnicity results, it helps to understand historical migration patterns and border changes. So if we're lucky, I think it's a 3-minute video. I'd love to show you this if I can get it to